On today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're going to hear from Locked On Kentucky host Lance Dawe, who's going to tell us everything we need to know about Andru Phillips, the Giants' third-round draft pick. That is coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, New York Giant fans, we are joined now by Locked On UK host Lance Dawe. He's going to tell us a little bit about Andru Phillips, the New York Giants' third-round draft pick in the 2024 draft. And Lance, welcome on into the Locked On Giants podcast.
Excited to be here. Excited to talk about what was one of Kentucky's best corners a season ago.
All right. Well, we're excited to learn more about him. And Lance, one thing that comes to mind, a lot of people want to know, and I think this might be a little overrated, but maybe you can shed a little bit more light on this, is Andru Phillips did not have any interceptions at UK, but he was still productive. Can you just talk about the type of system that they played there and what maybe led to the lack of interceptions for him?
Yeah, and I definitely do think that was scheme related, because Brad White, the defensive coordinator here for the last few seasons, has coached a relatively, I guess I would say, softer coverage scheme than most people. And I think you can see that reflected both positively and negatively in certain situations for the Wildcats. And it comes with a lack of turnovers. This is just simply a defense that, as far as coaching goes, just did not create a ton of turnovers, and that definitely was not on Phillips specifically. This has been a multi-year issue with just Kentucky. So I think if Andru was placed in a different situation, he would have more opportunities to create those kinds of turnovers, but interceptions, fumble recoveries, etc. But Kentucky struggled in all phases, whether it be fumbles, whether it be interceptions. They just were not. I don't think they were given the proper coaching, and they were not placed in the proper situation to consistently get those things.
Now, according to Pro Football Focus, Andru Phillips was targeted 57 times and allowed, actually the 57 times, the fourth most in the SEC, but only gave up 38 catches, which and tied for 10th amongst FBS corner with 23 defensive stops. I mean, was it a matter of, they just didn't target him a whole lot? How did they play their corners? Did they have their corners travel with the top receivers, or did they, basically leave them on one side?
Yeah, so I think when you look at the way that Kentucky wanted to play their defense, and with specifically Andrews, they played Andru a lot on the outside. Now, you guys, I think just based on what I've been seeing, is y'all are going to try and play him maybe a little bit differently. But as far as the way that Kentucky like to run their coverages, they didn't necessarily like to kind of cross things up. And I think that's where Andru kind of gets confused when you talk about his weaknesses, which we'll get to in a second, just as far as like different things coming across the field. I think he definitely works better in a zone type of coverage, where he can kind of sit on one side or one corner of the field and just operate with maybe an individual receiver on the outside. But I think that's where you saw Andru the most, and that can be explained as far as like looking at his targets and things, just kind of being matched up on the outside there. And you look at some of his more numbers on PFF, actually, he was actually 9th on the team in yards allowed per reception. So while he did get a decent amount of targets, he did not really give up a bunch of chunk plays. And I think that really does speak to some of the positive attributes that we can talk about with his game. But yeah, Kentucky, it's more of like a softer shell zone coverage that they consistently ran. As far as like the actual plays, I don't know if it was Tampa. I don't know if it was cover 3 or cover 4 consistently. I just know that Kentucky fans, and myself included, were frankly frustrated with some of the different things that Brad White was doing schematically. So when you look at what Kentucky was doing, when you look at what Phillips was doing, my assumption, and I don't know anything about the Giants scheme defensively, but my assumption is he is going to be put in a dramatically different situation.
Yeah, Joe Shane, the general manager, already has said that Andru Phillips is going to probably start in the slot
Yep.
Where I assume he played some at UK. Am I correct?
Yeah, he played a little over 200 snaps in the slot, I want to say, but he proves primarily an outside corner, but can definitely work inside outside. He has that versatility. Yes.
So, at the next level, if they're starting him in the slot, what do you think he needs to do in order to make his way back to the outside?
I think that he has to become more consistent finishing plays. I really like this guy's. I don't want to necessarily say speed because it's not like insane speed, but it's definitely above average speed that you're getting here with Phillips when it comes to the ability to recover and then to stick with certain receivers. But because of maybe some of the size issues that Phillips has, he's just not the best at consistently finishing plays. And it's funny, I went to go look at a couple of different draft breakdowns of Phillips, and there were a couple of different ones that said, man, he had a lot of incompletions, but at the same time, there were a lot of drop balls that could have been catchable against Phillips, and you may not see that at the second level. So Phillips, I think the one thing that he has to do to kind of make himself a presence that can work there on the outside is just to make sure that physically he can go out there and finish those plays. I think he's really, really good again at just kind of sticking with those guys, playing physical, playing scrappy, but he's got to get better at being consistent at the very end of the play as far as pass breakup goes, which he led Kentucky in a season ago with 6. But he's got to be more consistent in just making sure that balls that could be caught in the NFL are not caught in the NFL.
Now, one thing I found pretty interesting, I saw where some scouts had him as a low first round pick.
Hmm.
They had a grade on him low first round because he impressed so much with his football acumen. Can you talk about that part of his game? What do you know about how he goes about preparing? Who did he have kind of to lean on besides his coach in Kentucky, and just kind of how he got to that point?
I think you can look at the other two corners in this room that Kentucky had just a season ago, and Maxwell Harrison, and then Alex Afari, who was more of a linebacker type, but definitely did drop into coverage significantly more than you would see maybe a heavier linebacker. Those two guys, I think, were the people that he leaned the most on in this room. And as far as his work ethic and just kind of how he went about things, I mean, it's your go-to typical scrappy corner, right? He's going to show up every single day. You could see this in the interviews just about how excited he is to go out there and be physical, knock somebody, go out there and just play with intensity. And that's something that you see in the SEC consistently across the board is with these different corners. Obviously that's just kind of the cornerback mentality is to go out there scrappy, get in somebody's head, fight, pick, but you really do get to see, because of his lack of size, you really get to see those attributes on full display. If you go and watch some of his tape, he's just a super energetic cornerback when it comes to actually playing some of these guys in coverage, and it's shown in the way that he's able to recover and the way that he's able to fight on some of these different routes. I think that as far as tackling goes, I don't think effort is an issue for him. Absolutely, as far as finishing, again, that's another conversation, but it's nothing out of the ordinary, I think, with Phillips. And when it comes to guys that he leaned on, Harrison, who actually was Kentucky's, according to PFF, their best corner on the roster next season, who is heading into his junior year. He could be somebody that maybe you'll look at next season as well if y'all want to bring in some more UK Wildcats. I know y'all got Robinson on the roster already, but it's definitely one of those situations where you look at and go, okay, there's no energy problems, there's no effort problems, there's no mental problems. I don't think, as far as just being able to pick things up. It's just maybe the size limitations that you knock. But as far as just the intangibles go, I can definitely understand why he had first round upside. I mean, he is an insane athlete at the end of the day, and you're going to get a lot of those in the SEC, right? You're going to get a lot of different guys that are not necessarily the most. They don't play their position beautifully, but they're extreme, insane athletes, and so maybe their athleticism kind of makes up for some things. And as they get to a place like the Giants, maybe they're able to kind of develop and kind of grow in a more polished, refined organization.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things beyond what our favorite sports teams do or don't do can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who can offer a fresh perspective. Therapy can be different for everyone. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about other intangibles of Andrew Phillips's game. Specifically, what kind of a guy is he? How is he in the locker room? Is he vocal? Is he quiet? Is he a sponge as far as soaking up information? What can you tell us about that?
I'm going to be completely honest with you. I can't really tell you much about how Phillips operated in the locker room this past season, just as far as just how he was leading. But on the field, again, it comes back to the energy. I really do like his energy and consistency. He, just as far as I know, not a massive talker, not somebody that's going to go out there and talk your head off. When it comes to just his personality, I think he's a little bit more of a quiet guy, just based on how we see him play on the field. And as far as, soaking things up, I definitely think that he was somebody this past season that really did pay attention to the technical side of things. And I think that he's spoken on that in the past, just as far as making sure that he's got everything down at his position technically that he needs to be able to do. I think that's reflected well in his reports. I think that's reflected well in his film. Playing kind of in that softer zone coverage, just as far as being able to consistently be in a decent position to make a play on different outside, inside guys. So can't speak on him as far as just emotionally where he's at in the locker room, but as far as he operates on the field, bit of a quieter guy that really does have some impressive, detailed aspects to his game.
Can you tell us a little bit about the atmosphere at UK? I mean, because obviously these players, they come to New York. New York, I think everybody knows how it could be a very demanding media market.
Mhm.
The spotlight is like a gazillion times hotter than it is just about anywhere in the country. So can you just, based on what you know of the atmosphere at UK, how do you think Phillips might respond to, the pressures and, you know, moving to a new city? I don't know if he's ever been to New York before, but just moving, getting acclimated, and basically starting all over again in a big market.
I think Phillips will be able to handle this very well. If you look at Kentucky over the past decade or so, and you look at what Mark Stoops has done with this program, I mean, he has become more and more demanding of what he expects out of these players and out of this program. And he has consistently kind of built this thing up to the point where now Kentucky is a formidable opponent in the SEC. And it's something you hear when you hear guys like Kirby Smart in Georgia talk about playing the Wildcats every single year. They talk about just how frustrating it is to play against Kentucky's defense, because they will go out there and they will wear you down. And that's something that you see in Andru Phillips, just a resilient player, consistent player. And I really don't fear for a transition for him to kind of a bigger city, to kind of a more intimidating environment, because he has experienced that over a couple of seasons at UK. I think he's been able to really kind of step up and accept that role and kind of accept that challenge. In this program as a whole, there's been more excitement over these past few years as Kentucky has gotten better. Obviously, the wins definitely do help, but it's just as far as like the foundation of the program, it's a very solid thing that Mark Stoops has built. And again, a lot higher expectations come with those victories. And I do think that people like Phillips and people like Hairston and people like Afari and Derek Jackson, different players who are on this roster, on this defense, that have been here for a hot minutes and have been able to perform so well. I mean, it really does seem like they are embracing that challenge. And not only are they just embracing it, excited about it, they're succeeding. They are excelling. So I think that Phillips will be able to step into a place like New York. And, I think that he's going to be able to take advantage of whatever opportunities y'all give him.
You mentioned before Wandale Robinson, who was with UK. Do you remember or recall anything about, Phillips going up against him and, basically how the two of them worked off of each other?
I do not, but I will say this. I find it very entertaining that I believe y'all's GM in that interview was already saying that, hey, go ahead and call up Wandale because Phillips said that he's going to cook him in practice, and I love that. I love that, being able to get two of the same guys on the team in the NFL, just to be able to watch that relationship. And I'm sure genuinely, just based on where they are at, they're probably going to see a decent amount of each other in practice. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's awesome for those guys to be able to go up against each other. Although I will say Phillips is going to have his work cut out for him, because while he did fare well, against some bigger receivers, Wandale, smaller, quicker, twitchy, great route runner. Hey, he's going to have his hands full for sure.
When rookie corners come to the NFL, they tend to be a little grabby. I think maybe I don't know if that's because, the rules are a little different in college and whatnot. I mean, obviously, you talked about Phillips needing to finish plays a little bit better, but, do you see him as kind of a grabby type of player where maybe that might be a problem as he breaks into the NFL?
I don't think so. I mean, if you go and watch some of his film, there are some different things that could be considered questionable whenever you get to the next level, but that were not called in college. I think you definitely do see that. Was he a grabby corner? I wouldn't necessarily describe him as grabby. Maybe I'm just looking at it differently through blue and white glasses, because I don't see things as PI whenever I'm watching Kentucky. But I don't necessarily think that that's a massive issue. Although I will say this, when it comes to how he plays in coverage, he can tend to, and you'll see this in scouting reports as well, he can tend to kind of overrun things. And so sometimes you have to compensate by trying to get back with the receiver, putting a hand on him, maybe grabbing him a little bit. And so I absolutely agree. I've seen this with other corners at different SEC schools as well. I cover a few different SEC schools. But I've seen this where they do get to the league, and they are trying to kind of maybe overcompensate for some things technically that they aren't necessarily sound in to begin with. And it does come with a little bit more of a physical style of play that you just can't simply get away with in the NFL. But I would not describe him as an extremely grabby corner, but you do see on film from time to time where he does try, and like if he overruns something, if he doesn't have great leverage out of the gate, he will try and put a hand on him. And it's just a matter of whether or not it gets called more consistently at the next level, I guess.
What about his run support?
I think he's a serviceable run defender, but again, it comes back to the consistency with tackling. It's just whether or not he can actually go out there and finish in space consistently. I would say that he is definitely a downhill, come down, hit you in the mouth. But again, it comes back to whether or not he can actually go and finish those tackles consistently. I think he does a really good job of, if he's playing inside, getting to the outside, if things or if runs are heading to the outside of the field. But I don't think that would be like the biggest thing that I would look at when it comes to his game, just as far as like getting excited about different things he's good or bad at. I wouldn't necessarily look at the run support and say, oh, it's a great thing, or oh, that's a bad thing. Again, comes back to size, comes back to being able to finish those plays consistently. And again, it's not like he was necessarily missing tackles. It's just about the fact that you have to go and clean those things up.
So what do you see as terms of what do you think is holding him back in that regard? Is it his angles? Is it, he's coming at a guy too high, not leading with his shoulder? Do you see as the biggest issues there?
I think he's coming at guys too high. I think that's where you look at it at the end of the day. And also I think it's just physically, I keep saying his lack of size. He's not like a crazy small corner. He's 5'10", 190, but if he had a little bit more physicality, I think he could be able to come at as high as he does at different guys, and he would be able to finish plays. And actually, I need to correct myself here. He actually had 15 missed tackles, had a 23.1% miss rate last season, which is pretty high. I believe that was actually second most on the team a season ago. I think it does come down to just being able to kind of finish more with your body weight, finish lower. And again, once he figures that out, once he's able to kind of get those things down, which I think the Giants will be able to prepare him better than I think Brad White and this Kentucky defensive staff was. And I don't mean to sit here and knock the Kentucky's defensive staff over and over and over again. I just want to be very clear. The first few years of Brad White were good. Like they were like consistent, solid. Last season, something went awry with the coaching, and guys just sort of lost things. Kentucky was not a great tackling team. Kentucky doesn't turn to play people over. Quite frankly, their secondary was not as strong as it was in years past. And I think a lot of it has to do with not the players. Doesn't have to do with the players. It has to do with the coaching. And I'll say it again for like the third for like the third time now, and I don't mean to be so repetitive. Your system, the Giants will make him a better player. I'm very, very, very confident in that.
It's interesting. Giants with a new defensive coordinator, Shane Bowen, who worked with the Tennessee Titans previously, and if I'm not mistaken, I think their defensive backfield was pretty solid. And you keep saying that you're confident that the Giants will make Drew Phillips a better player. What gives you that confidence?
It's just because of the transition to the from the collegiate game to the NFL is you're going to be able to develop players differently. You're going to be able to kind of spend more time on just the game. These kids are no longer in college. They are specifically working in the NFL. This is all they're going to do. This is all that's going to be on his mind. And I was not a huge fan of the coaching job that Kentucky has done over the past season and a half or so. And so I just believe, not knowing anything or very little about how the Giants operate specifically, the transition to the NFL, if this is a third round pick for you guys, my assumption is you are going to do what you can to kind of accelerate him, kind of push him to that next development stage in his career. And I just think he's going to be able to perform. I just think that he's going to be able to go out there and actually execute. So it literally just is the transition to a better situation where you can kind of focus on things more. And I think that Phillips specifically, just based on watching him, based on how he played, the fact that he didn't have any turnovers, he's going to get an interception or two over the first couple of years with the Giants if y'all are able to put him out there. But I think statistically, and I think just as far as his play goes, he will become a better player.
Hey, Giant fans. So, when I'm not following the New York Giants, there's no greater thrill for me than playoff hockey. And with the New York Rangers in the thick of the playoffs, how cool would it be to get to a game to cheer on the blue shirts? What's that? Sold out, you say? Well, with Game Time, there are always great seats available at competitive prices as late as 1 hour into the event. Game Time offers last minute deals that can save you even more, and they take the guesswork out of what your seat view looks like, the fees, and all that other stuff that can make ticket buying a nightmare elsewhere. With Game Time, you even get cancellation protection, and if you find the tickets elsewhere in the same section and row for less, Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. So go on and take the guesswork out of buying tickets for your favorite concerts, shows, and sporting events with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Terms apply. Did he have much experience on special teams for UK?
Not that I recall. But I do remember seeing that you guys are going to try and work him as a special teams guy, and I think that's where it starts, right? I think that's where it's going to end up starting for Phillips, is whether or not he can kind of make a name for himself on special teams. And because of the athleticism, because of the speed, because of the different things that you like about him as a cornerback, there's going to be a really, really solid opportunity for him to kind of work his way into more legitimate playing time as a cornerback. But my assumption, I don't remember anything specifically or special about him on special teams. No pun intended. But I think that that's probably where he's going to start here. That's just my guess. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, special teams, and he'll probably be part of the rotation at the slot cornerback. So, the Giants have gone to a rotation, if you will, or a committee, I should say, not so much a rotation, but a committee. So that being said, if what Joe Shane says is true, which I have no reason to believe that it's not going to be true, and Drew Phillips is going to start off working in the slot, what is the ideal matchup for him as far as the type of receiver he might go up against? I'm assuming obviously a big, tight end is not going to be a good fit for him, but I don't know. What do you think would be a good fit for him if he does play in the slot?
Actually, it's kind of weird. So down in the Senior Bowl earlier this year, you got to see him go up against some bigger type receivers like Johnny Wilson and different guys like that, and he was actually pretty solid. And if you go and watch some of his film, you can watch him against Brock Bowers, actually pretty consistent in open space. So I think that what actually may give him problems, and this is just kind of weird to think about, is just twitchier, more polished route runners. Maybe guys that just have a little bit more speed to boot, because Andrew was able to play consistently with some more physical receivers. Again, no, consistently play with them. It's just a matter of whether or not he consistently finishes that play. But I think as far as if you're looking at the type of player that he would excel or struggle with, I think it does come down to, I think he's better against guys that just have less movement, that just have less wiggle room, it kind of in their game. And I think that if Andrew does again kind of get that opportunity to step up and get into the slot, he's going to face a ton of different types of bodies out there, as far as tight ends, smaller guys, X, Y, like whatever have you. But I think that I think that he will probably do just fine against everybody. But if you're looking to get him a good matchup, get him somebody that just doesn't have a ton in their arsenal, and he will shut them down. He will absolutely take them out of the game. It's something you saw with Bowers and Kentucky a season ago. Did a solid job covering him.
How is Andrew with jamming receivers? Does he have that jolt that will really knock them off their timing, or is it just not a developed part of his game?
Well, I think that it's not a developed part of his game, again, because of just how often Kentucky played him and other corners so far off the line of scrimmage, and that's again just a frustration of this defense, is they didn't play a lot of press, and they gave up a lot of short stuff. If you go and look statistically over the past couple of seasons, Kentucky had their secondary had a very high completion percentage allowed. And it's because they gave up so much off the line of scrimmage, so much short stuff, so much intermediate stuff. So guys like Phillips were not in position to kind of push people off their routes to start. And that's something that I barely saw watching these games. And so again, I keep saying it. Yeah, put him in something that's not such a soft, laid back defense, and I think you'll have an opportunity to show that. But I can't speak fluently on whether or not that'll be an aspect of his game to develop strongly.
All right, final question for you, Lance. What is something that maybe isn't as well known outside of UK about Andru Phillips that might be of interest to the New York Giants and their fan base?
Well, the thing that interests me about Phillips, I don't know anything about him just as far as like individually or any stories. I just find it fascinating that he's essentially had 2 years legitimate playing time in the SEC. I mean, he really started playing in what was his sophomore season, quote unquote. But he had 2 years in the system before he actually got to step out and get some legitimate playing time, and he played his way into a 3rd round selection. So my assumption with you guys is if he had stayed for 1 more year, he'd be a higher draft pick, at least projected out to be a higher draft pick. And he'd probably end up being whatever draft pick that was, whether it be a late 1st round or whether it be a 2nd round guy. So I think as far as, who he is, I'm impressed with the growth that he's had in such a small amount of time. And I think once you guys get your hands on him, I think he's going to be great.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what he can bring. The Giants rookies will be in this weekend, actually, for their rookie mini camp, Friday and Saturday. And I think they also have half a day on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. But Friday and Saturday, those practices and media sessions all open to the media. So we will start to see what Andru Phillips can do. I'm sure, going up against, if he gets a chance to go up against Malik Neighbors, that should be kind of interesting.
That should be awesome.
Yeah, amongst other guys that they have in there, they have a couple of undrafted free agent receivers who who are intriguing. But anyway, Lance, appreciate the time and the intel on Andru Phillips, folks. He's Lance Dawe. You can find him on the Locked On UK podcast. Check out all our college hosts. They do a great job. They're covering not just football, but basketball, recruiting, all that good stuff. And again, you can find them here on the same Locked On podcast network that you find Locked On Giants and all your other NFL podcasts. For Lance Dawe, I'm Patricia Traina. Thank you so much, Giant fans. Make sure you keep it here. We will have rookie minicamp updates coming for you Friday and into Saturday. So we will see you at that time.